Hello monsters and monster enthusiasts, I'm Monster J Art and welcome to my channel. So in today's video I want to continue my series of short and detailed makeup tutorials, and I want to talk about the wet on wet blending technique which I use with body paint. So I will first explain when I use it and then how to perform it, going in overview mode to show you how to do it in details. Before we jump into the subject, just some quick reminders. You can give a like and subscribe to the channel for more art related video and art tutorials. You can also follow me on Instagram to see pictures of my makeups and my drawings, and you can find the link in the description. So now that being said, let's talk about the wet on wet blending technique with body paint. So, when do you use the wet on wet blending technique? So in my last video I talked about the dry on dry blending technique and said that I use it when I want to mix a dark color over a normal color and make a gradient in a small area. So wet on wet is literally the opposite. Is when I want to mix a normal color over a lighter color, and when, especially a lighter color like white, and I want to cover a wider area, a larger area. So yeah, basically wet on wet is not a technique that I use a lot. Most of the time I almost only use it when I'm mixing color with white. Most of the time I use it when I want to mix gray into white, especially when I'm doing things like skulls or some masks that are white, when white is my base layer color. Example of that when I use this technique, I used it when I did my Phantom Ganon makeup look. I also used it when I did my Orvar the All-Form makeup character from Magic the Gathering. In fact, with this makeup it's where I experimented the most because I had a larger area to cover. And yeah, that's when I really perfected my technique. As I said, it's really not a technique that you use a lot, but I think it's a technique that is really useful when you're working with white, because it's really easy to overpower white when you're trying to make gradients, and when you do it's really hard to correct. Sometimes the only way is to just remove it and start over. So I think that's when the wet on wet blending technique is the most useful, especially mixing gray with white. So now that being said, let's do a demonstration of the wet on wet blending technique. So we're now in overview mode for the demonstration of the wet on wet blending technique with body paint. So for this demonstration I will use the Mehron Paradise paint. I will use white and Storm Cloud Gray. So white is my base layer, and on top of it I will try to make a smooth gradient from gray into white. Even if it's the wet on wet blending technique, you want your base layer to be dry before performing it. Another important point is that here it is important to use two brushes, one for each color, because with this technique I feel like you have to be a little quicker because you want to complete it before the colors have the time to dry down. So basically we'll have our layer of white and we'll add another layer of white and a layer of gray on top, and we'll blend them while they are wet. So that's what we'll do. So I will first go with my layer of white. Don't need necessarily a lot of body paint, but it's really, you want to reapply a small layer and make sure that now it's wet. And then you add some of the gray, you don't add too much, and you blend, you bring it toward the middle. Here the difference is, as you can see, I already get white paint on my brush. So it kind of acts as a buffer in a certain way to prevent the gray from going too far. And then you can retake the white and bring it also toward the middle. And then you can go back with the gray. As you can see, it gives you really smooth and soft gradient. In fact, it's not gray enough. You kind of don't really see it, so you can add another layer if you want. Don't go too much because it's really easy to go overboard. You can also remove some of the paint if you want, and then you do your kind of feathery brush stroke. Then you can retake your brush and go back, redo it. You need to blend a little bit on top here. That, you just need a little bit of white at the bottom here. And as you can see, it can give you really smooth blending. It's not, you have to be careful because you will grab both colors of paint really easily on the brushes, but that's how you perform the wet on wet. As you can see, even if it's with white, it is kind of a smooth blending. I do it because white is a tricky color. It's really easy to overpower white with whichever color you're using. So that's why I'm using the wet on wet technique. The reason why wet on wet is a little bit different is, as you've seen, when I apply the gray, I also grab white back on my brush, and it kind of prevents too much gray from being transferred on the rest of the white paint. So basically that's why here you're doing wet on wet. The other thing that you have to be careful is, since the whole area will be wet, you may remove a little more paint with your brush stroke that you would normally do, so just be aware of that. So since it's watery, it's really easy for the paint to grab back on your brush and to get removed. If you're wondering why I have 2 pucks of white body paint and I'm using the almost empty one, it's a way I have to make sure that to keep my white very white. So this is the one that I use for the base layer, and this is the one that I use for blending to prevent to get some gray in this one. So honestly, keeping white is something that can be hard with body paint, and I plan to make a video on this topic. But for now, this is how you perform the wet on wet blending technique with body paint. And this is how you perform the wet on wet blending technique with body paint. So I hope you really enjoyed the video. If you have any question about this technique, you can leave it in the comments down below. Also, if you have any other question regarding cosplay makeup, body paint, or face painting, you can also leave it in the comments down below, because it gives me inspiration to make other videos like this, so where I can explain and answer your question more in detail. So I hope you really enjoyed the video. If so, please feel free to give a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in another video. Bye!